It's funny that I'm speaking today. I'm getting to share my testimony. I'm honored that I do get to share my testimony. But over at our church, over on the west side of town, New Life, we just started a series this morning that I'm co-teaching in Sunday school about sharing your story. And then when Brother Jerry, I hope if you're watching this, you have a good time down in Florida. Now I see why he asked me to speak. He's in Florida. But it was funny that we're coming over and we're doing a series on sharing your story and about being storytellers. And we all have a story to tell about how we came to Jesus and how he changed our lives. Now, some of our stories might be a little bit more dramatic than others, but all of us have a story that folks are wanting to hear about what God has done for us in our lives and how he has saved us and how he's changed our lives. Psalm 73:28 says, "But as for me, it is good to be near God. I've made the sovereign Lord my refuge, and I will tell you of all of his deeds." And then Psalm 66:17 says, "Come and listen, all you who fear God, and I will tell you what he did for me." Ooh, I will tell you what he did for me. I'm going to tell you this morning what he did for me and what he has done for me in my life. And just briefly, when I was a kid, I always wanted to be either a police officer or a fireman. That's all I ever talked about. And my mother and father would kind of talk about it, encourage that. But when I was 11 and my sister Ann was 3, she was killed. She was run over accidentally by my grandparents' car out on the farm that we lived on. And after Ann got killed, my mother and father really didn't want to hear me talk any about it. Left me as the only child, and they didn't want to hear me talk about being a policeman or a fireman. Now, I understood that a little bit, but I didn't understand it completely until I had children of my own. And then I totally understood why my mother and father didn't want me to go in that line of work. But I did go into that line of work, and I was hired with the Davis County Sheriff's Office in 1982. Not bragging, but I was a good police officer. I was a good sheriff's deputy. I tried to follow the golden rule. I often said my parents raised me in the church, and I was literally drugged as a child. I was drugged to church every time the doors opened, whether that be Wednesday and Sunday. My mother and father actively participated in our church, and they were Christians. And I tell people I knew my parents were Christians, but I saw their faith lived out when my sister was killed. And it had a huge impact on my life growing up. But I was with the sheriff's office, and I took every course that I could take on officer survival and what to do if you get in a shooting situation, and all those things that police officers are exposed to back then have always been exposed to throughout history. Is that you all know that someday that you might get into an encounter where you're going to have to use deadly force, or deadly force is going to be used against you, and it's still applicable today. I kept myself in good physical shape. I know it doesn't quite look like that now, but I did back then. And I was careful. I was good to people, and we live in the South. A lot of times people will say there's a lot more police officers that are shot in the South, and that's a true fact in the southern regions, is because we like to talk too much. And we do show kindness, and people in the South, we're friendly, are we not? We're friendly to folks. You get on the elevator or whatever, people speak to you, they talk to you, and that's the way we are. So I was a canine officer at the time. I had my dog with me, Bill, and I'd gone out to serve some papers. Now, the Sheriff's Department still serves papers to this day. It's a dreaded thing. None of the deputies, I promise you, if you ask any one of them if they like serving civil papers, they'll say, no, I hate it. And we hated it back then too. We served divorce papers, we served subpoenas, we served whatever. It's just part of the job that we had to do that other agencies didn't have to fool with. And I had some papers to serve. I was working the mid shift, and I had some papers to serve on a guy named Darrell Perry out in Pea Ridge, out in Pleasant Ridge, out 231, almost to the county line. And it was the last paper service I had of the day, and I wanted to get it done so I could do real police work, as we like to say. And I went out to Mr. Perry's house, and unbeknownst to me, Mr. Perry had been involved with his family, his estranged family. They'd been going at it over a will. I had some papers. Mr. Perry had married a lady. Darrell Perry was 53 at the time, and he had married a lady that was 70, which, is fine by me. But when he married her, she had been diagnosed with terminal cancer. And when they got married, she had changed her will and left everything that she owned to Darrell Perry. And the papers that I had and I was serving that day were from her daughter, who was contesting the will, because she said, my mother's not in her right frame of mind to make that decision to leave everything to this man that literally she just met a little while ago and then got married to. So I was taking these civil papers out to serve on Mr. Perry. So I got out to his house that evening. It was dusk when I got there, and I pulled up in the driveway, and I pulled my cruiser behind his car. His car is parked in the driveway. And I got out, and back in the day, if you needed your dog out of the car, you had to roll your window down. And then your dog, your canine, if you got in trouble, would just jump over the front seat, and then he'd jump out the window, the driver's side window. That's how we had to do it. Nowadays, police officers have a electric door opener on their belt. It's a button, and they can push the button, and the back door just automatically opens up, and the dog comes out. But back in the day, if you didn't expect any trouble, you didn't roll your windows down so your dog could get out. And I certainly didn't expect any trouble that afternoon out at Darrell Perry's house on Old Hartford Road. I got out of the cruiser, and I went to the door, and I knocked on the door several times, and he didn't answer. And I say this is God thing number one, because back in the day, you just didn't call dispatch every time you got out on a civil paper, because there were so many to serve. You get on there, you type the radio all the time. But I did. I got out, and I gave the address, and I said, I'm here. There's a car in the driveway. Could you call the house and see if somebody will answer? Dispatch called. He did answer. They said, you need to come to the door. Deputy sheriff out there. Darrell Perry came to the door, and Darrell Perry was about 6 feet tall. He weighed 250 pounds. He had a full beard. He had a white shirt on, a green pair of pants, and white socks. Didn't have his shoes on. And he opened the door. He's a big kind of barrel-chested man. And I wasn't that big. I'm big now, but I wasn't a big man. I wasn't a big man then, But Darrell came to the door, and I said, Mr. Perry, I've got some civil papers I need to serve on you. And he said, all right. He said, come on in. And I could look at his pants, and I could see he didn't have a gun on him under his T-shirt. Didn't look like he had a gun in his pocket. And I was watching him. We walked in. He was very soft-spoken. He sat down at the table in the kitchen. And I said, I've got to read these papers to you, Mr. Perry. He said, all right. So I started to read the civil papers to him, and they said he was going to have to vacate the residence. He could get some personal effects, but he was going to have to leave the residence until this matter was settled in court. He couldn't damage or destroy any of the property. So the whole time I was reading the papers to Mr. Perry, he kept repeating, why are they doing this to me? Why are they doing this to me? And I said, well, Mr. Perry, I don't know why they're doing it to you. I said, I'm just doing my job. And he said, that's what they said when they dropped the bomb on Hiroshima. And I was like, that's really weird that he said that. But, to him, I was dropping a bomb on him. This was a big bomb getting dropped on him that he wasn't expecting coming. And so anyway, he got up and he walked around the house, and I followed him throughout the house just to make sure that he didn't get a weapon. And throughout walking through the house, Mr. Perry said, why? He just kept saying, why are they doing this to me? I was like, holy Moses, I wish, just come on, let's get out of here, let's get outside, I want to get it done. We didn't get in an argument. He never raised his voice. We got outside. It was almost dark. The attorney had asked for the keys to the residence, asked if I could get them, and I said, Mr. Perry, can I get the keys to the house? And he said, well, is it in that order? And I said, no, sir, it's not in there. And he said, well, I'm not going to give them to you. I said, okay. Have a good night. That was my last words to Darrell Perry. Have a good night. I turned around, walked to my cruiser. He walked to his car. I didn't watch him. There was no threat symposium that they talk about now. There was no yellow, red, orange flag to go up. There was nothing that indicated to me what was about to happen. I got back to my cruiser and I reached down with my left arm to open the door, and when I did, I heard the first shot go off, and it was a loud crack, pow. It's like somebody, if they threw a firecracker in here and you weren't expecting it, everybody jumped. I did jump. I jumped, of course, immediately turned to Darrell Perry, and Darrell had a .38 caliber revolver in the front seat of his car, and he'd taken it out and he'd shot me with it. He was probably 8 to 10 feet away from me, and he was in what we police call a perfect Weaver stance. He was standing just like that. And that first round that he'd fired had gone through my left arm. It went through my left arm into my left side and then all the way across my abdominal area. And I never felt it. I never felt the round go in. I never felt any of it. Just that immediate adrenaline pump that I had. And so when you're a police officer, this is not rocket science, but they say in school that if you do come under fire, the first thing you do is make yourself a small target, obviously. The second thing you do is seek cover. The third thing you do is return fire. So I immediately turned to go to the back of my cruiser. I made myself a small target. I got down a lot lower than I can get now, I can tell you that, and started to head back to the back of my cruiser because that was the only cover that there was. And as I turned to start back to my car, he started to fire again, and it was in rapid succession. It was pow, 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 pow. The second round hit me in the back, in the flank, in the left flank, and a piece of that bullet, about as big as a pencil lead, sheared off, and when it did, it cut my spinal cord between the T10 and T11 vertebra. And when it cut it, and I didn't cut it in half, but it cut it. And when it cut it, it paralyzed me from the waist down, and I fell. So as I'm falling, he's still firing. All this happened within about a 7 to 8 second span of time. So I'm taking me a long time to tell it, but it happened that quick. It all happened that fast. And so the next round hit me in the left hip, and then as I hit the ground, the last round went through my left heel, went through my shoe and up into my left heel. Now, the only round that he missed me with, and I have that hanging in my house, we all wear those campaign hats. The only round he missed me with was the one that went through the brim of my hat, because I had my head down and I've got a perfect .38 caliber bullet hole through the rim of my hat. Had I been upright with my head upright, I wouldn't be here talking to you today. Wouldn't have happened. I landed on my right shoulder. It flipped me over. Darrell was running at me when he was firing, and he just jumped on top of me, all 250 pounds of him. He jumped on top of me. It threw my arms back. My arm flew back like this, and he jumped on me, and he took his knees and he pinned my arms back. And he took that revolver and he cocked it, and he put it to my forehead, and he pushed my head down into the gravel. I just closed my eyes. I thought, man, this is it. He's going to shoot me in the head. And he just snapped it. It snapped. I opened my eyes, and he was looking at the gun. And he'd fired all 5 shots. He had a 5-shot revolver. And he fired all 5. So he took the gun, and he palmed it. He held it like a rock. And he started hitting me in the head with it. He started hitting me in the head with it as hard as he could hit me. He hit me in the head over 25 times. He hit me so hard, it fractured my skull. He knocked 2 of my front teeth out. He hit me so hard. And as he was hitting me, I do this every time. It's still hard to talk about it, even all these years later. As he was hitting me, I got my arms free. And I started fighting. And I started blocking his hit, and I kept saying, Mr. Perry, stop, what are you doing, stop. But there was no stopping Darrell Perry. He didn't know me. He didn't know Oz Osborne. He didn't know I had a family. It was a proverbial kill the messenger. I'm going to kill this guy. And that's what he was trying to do. And so as he was striking me, I reached down and I grabbed my pistol. I had a 9mm pistol, automatic, semi-automatic pistol. And I tell you, this is God thing number 2, and any of you folks that are familiar with firearms know this. They didn't teach us this in the academy, I promise. But as I drew my weapon, I inadvertently pushed the clip release on the gun. I don't remember, it wasn't conscious. As I drew my weapon, I pushed the clip release, and the clip came out of my pistol. I drew it, and when I drew my gun, he dropped his revolver and, of course, grabbed my hand. I had the gun between us, but I still had one in the chamber. There was one in my gun. There was a live round in my gun. And so we were struggling with the gun. I was pushing. I was trying to shoot him. I mean, obviously, I was trying to shoot him. But I just wasn't strong enough. He's just too much weight on me, and he was pushing the gun back, and I was pushing it toward him. And so I just squeezed it off. I just squeezed that trigger, and the gun goes off between us, and he twists the gun out of my hand. My gun twisted out of my hand, immediately sticks it back down to my head and snaps it off. He then brings it up and tries to charge it. He tries to load it, but there's no clip in it. And he sticks it down to my head again for the 3rd time, and he snaps it off. He looked at my gun and said, "You've got one of those fancy automatics." He did not know how to load my gun. I had 2 clips on my belt. My clip was laying right there in the ground. He said, "You've got one of those fancy automatics." He then got up. He went and grabbed the civil papers that were laying on the ground, and he wadded them up, and he brought them back over, and he stuffed those papers down in my mouth. And he said, "Here, how do you like it, you SOB?" He then took my keys to my cruiser off my belt. By this time, it was dark. Bill, when he was beating me and shooting me, Bill could see every bit of it that was going on. He was barking and carrying on like I'd never heard him bark before. He was trying to get out of that car, and he actually tore the door handle off the back door, the armrest. He tore it off, trying to get out of that car. So Darrell took my keys, and I said, God thing number 3, Bill would not let anyone get close to that cruiser, much less get in it. He would not. So Darrell took my keys, and he got up, and he got into my car. By this time, it was dark. He got in my cruiser, and believe you me, by this time, I was ready for him to go. But he got in my car, and I thought, my gosh, he started up. He's going to run over me. He's going to back over me because I was laying right behind the back wheel of the car. And I said, he's going to back over me. and he just put it in reverse and started to back up, and I rolled over on my side, and the wheels just went right down my back of my pants. And then in our trial, he said he didn't try to run over me, but they'd taken my clothes, and there were rubber fibers in my shirt and my pants where the tires rubbed against me. And he backed up and he stopped, and the headlights to my cruiser were on, and I was looking over my shoulder like that to the headlights, and I thought, well, he's going to run. I can't get out. He's going to run over me. But he didn't. He backed on out of that driveway, and he left. Now, I want to tell you, I cannot explain to you here horror. I cannot explain to you what it means for someone to try to take your life, to try to kill you. I cannot. But as I laid there, I felt everything when he left. I felt everything. My arm, my side, my back felt like somebody had taken a hot poker and stuck me in the back. My legs felt like they were straight up in the air and they were laying flat on the ground. And I want to tell you something. I've never been that scared in my life, either before or after that day. I've never been that scared. And one reason I was scared is because I absolutely was not in the place that I needed to be with Jesus. I was not. And so, my mom, when I was a kid, I'd get scared. She'd always say, there's no need to be scared, son. Jesus is always with us. He's always with us. She'd always repeat the 23rd Psalm to me. She said, just repeat, you memorize it, and you know it. Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And as I laid there, the sky was as purple and the stars were as bright as I'd ever seen them. And I repeated the 23rd Psalm out there. And I know the God that you know and that I know. I mean, he was right there. And he didn't say, you're going to live or you're going to die. He just said, I'm here. I'm here. So many times in our lives, God has been there for all of us, and he said, I'm here. And his peace, that peace that surpasses all understanding, was with me, and I literally was okay. I was okay. Some cars had driven past down the road, and I thought, if I lay up here, I'm going to bleed to death. And so I rolled over on my stomach, and I drug myself to the side of Old Hartford Road, and in just a minute, a man, Mr. and Miss Halsey, pulled up, a man and his wife, and I say it's my Good Samaritan story. You don't think people care about you, but people do care about you. They're compassionate, and they got out of the car, and I mean, I definitely looked like Frankenstein. There's no doubt about it. And Mr. Halsey got out, and I said, call 911. I've been shot. And his wife said, come on, Clarence, come on. And he said, no, I'm going to stay here with him. And his hands, I'm not exaggerating, his hands were shaking that bad. But he let his courage overcome his fear. And he stayed there with me, and I'll never forget, he just kept patting my head. He kept patting my head, saying it's going to be all right. And of course, Masonville Fire Department got there, the ambulance got there. I knew all those people. And of course, their eyes were about as big around as saucers, and all of them were saying, Oz, you're going to be all right, you're going to be all right. Their faces were as white as a sheet of paper. And I was like, I don't think I'm going to be all right by looking at your old faces. I'm not. I was so scared, and got to the hospital. I knew the emergency room doctor. His face was white. It was crazy. They took me to surgery the third day. I got up. My mom and dad, my grandparents were there. The doctors came in on the third day and told me and then told my parents, my doc said, "You're never going to walk again, Oz. You're going to be confined to a wheelchair the rest of your life. You're not going to have any control of your bowels, your bladder." I do. I do. He said, "You're not going to be able to have any children." I can't imagine my mother and father. I mean, I know they were glad I was alive, but, I just can't imagine. It was hard. Hardest thing I'd ever heard. But you know something? God had other plans for me. People in this community and all across the United States got thousands of letters saying, "I'm praying for you," thousands upon thousands. People I didn't even know. Praying for you. Praying for you. So, it took a long time. I was bitter for a long time. It wasn't a story of immediately reconciliation. But it was a story of healing, not only spiritually, but physically too. About the 10th, 12th week in the hospital, I started to move my second toe on my right leg here, or my left leg, I'm sorry. And things just started to improve from there. Took me about a year to start walking again. I don't have any feeling in my left leg, and my right leg doesn't work, but my left leg works, and my right leg I got a little feeling in, so it's all good. It's all a blessing. But about a year after the trial and everything was over, Daryl Perry, he was sentenced to 30 years in the penitentiary. He never had been in the penitentiary. And he had to serve all his time down in the Eddyville Penitentiary, and that's the maximum security here in Kentucky. And if you've never been in jail or in the penitentiary, I tell you, that's a place you don't want to go. But about a year after it was all over, trial 2 years after I'd been shot, I got a letter. He sent it to the Commonwealth Attorney, but they delivered it to me. Daryl Perry in that letter told me he was sorry for what he'd done for me, what he'd done to me. And he asked for me to forgive him. Wow. He asked me to forgive him. I want to tell you something. It didn't happen overnight. Wasn't an overnight thing. I'll tell you this. God worked on me day and night. I can tell you that. He worked on me. His words to me were, "I forgave you. I forgave you." And he's asking for forgiveness. He's asking for mercy. He just hammered it. Day after day, he hammered that on me. Well, I did. I did forgive him. I wrote him and I said, "I forgive you." And guess what happened to me? What do you think happened to me? Did it set me free? Amen. Did God set me free? Amen. He did. My story is as much about forgiveness, about mine and about his, than it is about overcoming obstacles. Jesus talks all throughout the Bible about the power of forgiveness, about the power of mercy, about the power of loving one another. Those of us who have known his forgiveness, we are to be strikingly different from those who do not know it. We are called to do what the world thinks is impossible to do. That's what the Lord calls us to do. To forgive and to be merciful just as our Father is merciful. Imagine the impact on our families, on our marriages, on our workplaces when we embrace and live by those principles that Jesus has set down before us. Evangelist Dwight Thompson said, "You can spend your life any way that you want, but you can only spend it once." Only God can turn a mess into a message, a test into a testimony, a trial into triumph, and a victim into victory. Amen? He can only do it. I stand before you today, not a crippled man, but a blessed man. Man blessed beyond his wildest imaginations. I stand here before you, the wonderful wife, with not 0 children, but 3 children, and soon to be 7 grandchildren. If you don't think God is a miracle worker, if you don't think He can redeem and bring you out of the depths of whatever problem you're in, you're mistaken. You don't know Him like I know Him. Because He can overcome anything, any obstacle in our lives, anything. He has with me. Alan said His mercies are new every morning. And they are. Amen. This world needs to hear your story, folks. This world needs to hear the good news of Jesus Christ about mercy, forgiveness, and love. Amen. Thank you all for letting me share my story with you this morning. Colin, you guys can come up. Appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thank you.